So my name is Jeff Mersch, and I'm a professor of planetary science in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at the University of Tennessee. And as a planetary scientist, I mostly work with spacecraft that we send to other planets, but I also study the geology of sites on Earth that in some way have a resemblance to, for example, the geology of Mars. We call them terrestrial analogs. And we study these areas on Earth because we have better access to them than the places that we want to learn about on Mars, where maybe we only have an orbiter to look down from above and do remote sensing. We can actually walk up to these geologic systems on Earth and pick them apart in detail. And in terms of how drones fit into the picture, they've really, over the last 6 years or so, become just sort of a part of my standard field geologist toolkit. We use them to get context for the sites that we're studying and to give us a much greater richness of detail in the imaging and the three-dimensional reconstruction of surfaces. And then other times we use them as simulators for new instruments that we might want to send on missions to Mars. So as an example of the former type of study where you're just using it to get context, I'm working on a project right now in the Mojave with another professor in our department, Chris Fetto. And the place we're studying is called the Marble Canyon Formation, or Marble Mountains Wood Canyon Formation in the Mojave Desert. And this formation was formed during the early Cambrian, before dry land was colonized by rooted plants. And it was formed in a braided river stream system. And that river stream transitioned into the ocean to make a delta. And the reason it's a good analog for studying Mars is because this is before the colonization of dry land by rooted plants. Those rooted plants tend to stabilize channel banks in river systems. And so the stream systems and the whole sedimentary architecture that you get in modern river systems is controlled largely by these rooted plants. But back in the Cambrian, they didn't exist. And we think, so far as we know, there's no rooted plants on Mars, or have not been. And so if we want to understand more about how these large-scale river systems existed in the past on Mars, like we think they did, then this makes a really good place to study them, because no plants on either one. And the professor I'm working with has been studying this formation for the last 30 years. He would go out there for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. It's on a steep cliff, about a 45-degree cliff. And he would hike up and down one vertical section of that cliff in a single field trip over 2 or 3 weeks, studying it in detail. Now with the drones, we can go out there and we can map, maybe 100 meters of vertical exposure and a whole kilometer along this mountain range. We can map it at a spatial resolution of a few millimeters per pixel. And so that allows him to take one column that he studied in one field trip, climbing up and down this cliff face, and correlate it with all the layers that are present in another column that he did the previous year. You can start to connect up the different strata in this exposed outcrop and get a much bigger picture of what the overall system was doing at that time. And it's aided it's not just pictures, it's also aided by, we take pictures on a grid with the drone flying back and forth. And I have software that can put all those pictures together and not only come up with a large scale but high resolution mosaic for the system, but also a three-dimensional topographic model that you can drape the imagery over. So you can really see all the structural relationships between the different layers. It just gives you a complete picture of the system. And then the other way we use them is not for the sake of studying the geology of the terrestrial field site itself, but as a test bed for future instruments that we want to send to Mars. So we're doing work in the Atacama Desert right now in Chile, which is the driest desert on Earth. And we're working in places where, like dry lake beds and hydrothermal deposits, hot springs, where they would have made really good habitats for microbial primitive life, which is one of the things we're looking for on Mars. We know basically where to go on Mars, places where there was water, but specifically within those systems, where do you go to get the rock with the highest potential of preserving evidence for life? That's a question that's still an active topic of research. So we're looking at what are the specifications, what are the capabilities of future orbiting instruments and cameras and spectrometers that we would want to send to Mars. How good would they have to be in terms of their spatial resolution, their spectral resolution, their coverage, to find these small microhabitats within these systems like dry lake beds on Mars if they appeared on Mars the way they are found on Earth. So we fly these sites, like in Chile, or in the Arctic is another place I work, with the drone at a fairly low altitude above the ground, taking very, very high resolution data. And then we degrade it to different resolutions that you could get from different potential cameras that we might want to send to Mars. And we see at what point do we start to, well, as you're going from coarse resolution down to sharper resolution, where's the critical threshold where you can start to see these things, not only identify them, but diagnostically identify them. You know, not just they might be there, but here's the key markers that are indicative of these little microhabitats where these microbial communities live. So it's a combination of doing fresh science for Earth, but also learning what we need to bring to Mars to do for future research for our highest priority goals.